I moved to the quiet suburbs to bury my past, but when a petty act of destruction unearthed it, I decided someone else deserved to lose everything. The suburbs are supposed to be boring. That's why I moved here. After years of living out of a suitcase in places where the background noise was either a marketplace haggling or distant gunfire, a quiet street with obsessively manicured lawns felt like the ultimate luxury. My little patch of that American dream was my garden, specifically my mother's stargazer lilies. They were a riot of pink and white, a fragrant, explosive testament to life that I nurtured with a devotion that bordered on religious. They were the only part of my past I allowed to be on public display. Everything else was locked down, compartmentalized, and buried deep. I was on my knees, gently teasing a weed from the soil around the base of a particularly proud stalk, when the shadow fell over me. I didn't have to look up to know it was a police cruiser. I'd clocked it the moment it turned onto my street, its slow, predatory crawl so out of place among the minivans and Teslas. I stayed exactly where I was, my hands in the dirt. In my line of work, you learn that sudden movements are a bad idea, no matter the continent. The car door creaked open. Heavy, purposeful footsteps crunched on my gravel driveway. "This your place?" The voice was thick with a kind of bored authority that set my teeth on edge. I slowly rose, wiping my soiled hands on my jeans, and turned to face him. He was a textbook case. Mid-40s, a gut straining against his duty belt, mirrored sunglasses that made it impossible to read his eyes. His name tag read, Miller. "Yes, officer, it is," I said, keeping my voice even and calm. "De-escalation 101. Can I help you with something?" He let his gaze wander over my two-story colonial, my freshly painted shutters, and finally, my face. It was a look I knew well. The look that says, "This doesn't add up. You don't fit here." We've had some complaints," he said, hooking his thumbs into his belt. "Suspicious activity." I almost laughed. The most suspicious activity on this street was Mrs. Henderson's aggressive recycling sorting. Complaints? From whom? About what? "Don't need to tell you that," he grunted. His eyes drifted from my face down to my garden. A slow, contemptuous sneer crept onto his lips. "This mess. It's an eyesore. We have standards in this neighborhood." My blood went cold. A mess? My mother's lilies? "It's a flower garden, officer." "Looks like a patch of overgrown weeds to me," he said, taking a step closer. He gestured with his chin. "You need to clear this out. It's attracting pests, probably. Against ordinance." I knew for a fact it wasn't. I'd read every single local ordinance before I even put in an offer on the house. It's a habit. Know the rules of the battlefield. "With all due respect, officer, these are prize-winning hybrids. They are not weeds, and they are perfectly within code." Something in my tone, the quiet confidence, must have flickered past his defenses and hit a nerve. His jaw tightened. He saw my refusal to cower, not as a citizen exercising her rights, but as a challenge to his authority. "I'm telling you to clean it up," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Are you refusing to comply with an officer's directive?" He was escalating. This wasn't about the flowers anymore. It was a power play. My training screamed at me, running through a dozen different scenarios, from tactical retreat to non-lethal takedowns. But I wasn't in Langley, and this wasn't a hostile operative. This was a man with a badge and an ego on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. "I am not," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "But I will not be destroying my private property based on your personal gardening preferences." That was it. That was the spark. He took another step forward, his hand dropping to the nightstick at his side. He wasn't reaching for a notepad to write a citation. He was preparing to make a point. His mirrored sunglasses reflected the beautiful pink lilies back at me. "I think you misunderstood me," he said. "This is not a suggestion." And then he did it. With a swift, violent motion, he unclipped his baton. I saw it coming a second before it happened, my body tensing, every muscle fiber ready to react. But I couldn't. I couldn't blow my cover over this. I had to stand there and watch as he swung the heavy stick, the crack of the first lily stem sounding like a gunshot in the quiet air. He didn't stop. He moved with a furious energy, slashing and hacking, petals exploding into the air like pink shrapnel. One by one, my mother's flowers were decapitated, their broken stems left bleeding into the rich soil I'd so carefully tended. He was breathing heavily when he finished, the picture of self-satisfied dominance. He reclipped his baton, a small, triumphant smile playing on his lips. "There," he said, as if he'd done me a favor. "That's better. Now clean this mess up." He turned and walked back to his car, never looking back, leaving me standing in the ruins of the only beautiful thing I had. I stood there, motionless, as his cruiser disappeared down the street. My heart was a cold, hard stone in my chest. The rage was a physical thing, a white-hot current under my skin. My training was screaming at me now, not with tactics, but with data. I had his face, his name, his badge number 714. I'd mentally recorded the make, model, and plate of his cruiser. I noticed the slight limp in his left leg, the way he favored his right side. He thought he had just put some uppity black woman in her place. He thought he'd won. What he didn't know was that my job wasn't just about gathering intelligence, it was about leveraging it. He saw a gardener, a victim. He didn't see the woman who could find out where he lived, what he drank, who he owed money to, and what skeletons were rattling around in his closet by the time he finished his shift. He thought he was just destroying flowers. He had no idea he had just planted a seed. The smell of crushed stems and bruised petals followed me into the house. It was a ghost, a cloying, sweet scent of death that clung to my clothes and hair. I didn't cry. Tears are a luxury, an indulgence I was trained out of years ago. Instead, I walked straight past the living room with its comfortable sofa and family photos, all stock photos, of course, and went down to the basement. Behind a steel-reinforced door disguised as a pantry lay my real home. The quiet hum of servers and cooling fans was a familiar comfort. 3 monitors glowed in the darkness, waiting for my command. This was my sanctuary, my armory, my operating theater. I sat down, my hands still flecked with dirt, and flexed my fingers over the keyboard. The rage hadn't subsided. It had just been refined, chilled, and honed into a tool. It was time for work. Officer Daniel Miller, badge 714, an easy pull from the municipal database. 46 years old, divorced, 2 children he pays late support for. A 15-year veteran of the force with a commendation for a drug bust in 2012, and a string of citizen complaints since. Excessive force, unlawful search, verbal abuse. All of them investigated and dismissed. The signature at the bottom of each dismissal report was the same. Captain Robert Henderson. Henderson. The name hit me like a jolt. Captain Henderson lived 4 houses down. His wife, Carol, was the president of the neighborhood watch, and the one who always complained about my unconventional gardening hours. The suspicious activity complaint wasn't random. It was targeted. It was a coordinated effort between a bored, petty woman and a police captain willing to use his attack dog to enforce his vision of a perfect, uniform, beige suburbia. This was no longer about a man with an ego. This was about a rot in the system, and I knew exactly how to excise a rot. I dove deeper, peeling back the layers of Officer Miller's life. Financial records are a storybook for people like me. Miller wasn't just in debt. He was drowning in it. Credit cards maxed out, a second mortgage on his sad little condo, and a series of regular large cash withdrawals from an ATM near a notorious local dive bar. That led me to him, a man named Sal, the Weasel Moretti. Sal wasn't just a bookie. He was a loan shark, with ties to organized crime, a file thick with charges that never seemed to stick. Miller owed Sal over $30,000, and the interest was compounding daily. A man that deep in the hole is a man who makes mistakes. He becomes a liability, and a liability is a lever. I didn't need to destroy Miller's life. I just needed to apply the right pressure in the right place and let his own bad decisions do the work for me. Sal Moretti was the pressure point. Captain Henderson was the support structure. I had to kick the support out first. My plan formed with cold, crystalline clarity. Henderson and Miller were arrogant. They believed they were untouchable within their little kingdom. I needed to show Henderson that his attack dog had rabies, that Miller was no longer a tool he could control, but a bomb that was about to go off in his lap. I found what I needed in the precinct's internal servers, a place I wasn't supposed to be, but firewalls are just suggestions when you have the right keys. There was a weekly, off-the-books poker game. High stakes. The attendees were a cozy group of local businessmen, a few city council members, Sal Moretti himself, and, of course, Officers Miller and Captain Henderson. They were using a backroom at a restaurant owned by Sal's cousin as a private club. It was illegal, unethical, and the perfect nexus of corruption. I spent an hour drafting the message. It had to be perfect, anonymous, untraceable, but laced with enough intimate detail that it couldn't be ignored. I routed it through a series of servers, bouncing the signal from Estonia to Brazil before it would finally land in the inbox of the one department Henderson couldn't control: internal affairs. I detailed the game, the location, the times, the names. I listed the expensive watches and undeclared cash Henderson was known to flash after a good night. I painted a picture of a precinct captain in the pocket of a known mob associate. Then I added the final touch. A single sentence designed to detonate Miller's world and sever his connection to his protector for good. A sentence just for him. My finger hovered over the enter key. The faces of Miller and Henderson stared back at me from my screen, smiling in a photo from the department's last charity gala. They looked so confident, so secure in their power. They thought the worst thing that could happen today was getting a little dirt on their uniform. With a soft click, I sent the email. A small notification popped up on my screen. Message sent. The trap was set. Now, I just needed to watch the animals chew their own legs off to escape it. I leaned back, the ghost of my mother's lilies still in the air, and for the first time all day, I smiled. Panic has a distinct sound. It's not loud screaming. It's the clipped, frantic cadence of a whispered phone call, the kind you can just barely pick up with a parabolic microphone aimed at a slightly ajar window 4 houses down. For 2 days I listened to Captain Henderson's world unravel. I heard him arguing with his wife, denying everything. I heard him on the phone with his lawyer, his voice tight with fear. The anonymous tip to Internal Affairs, with its unnerving specificity, had landed like a grenade in their cozy little club. The best part was the sentence I'd crafted just for Miller. I'd included a line stating that the anonymous source had learned of the game from a disgruntled officer, badge number 714, who was allegedly keeping records of the illegal games to leverage against a local loan shark. It was a lie, of course, but it was a beautiful, poisonous lie. It painted Miller not as a participant, but as a potential informant. It made him a rat. I could almost taste Henderson's paranoia from my basement command center. He wouldn't trust Miller anymore. He'd cut him loose, probably even throw him to the wolves to save himself. The night of the next poker game, I was parked a block away in a nondescript utility van, the kind that's so boring it's practically invisible. I had a perfect view of the restaurant's back entrance through a telephoto lens, my monitors displaying the feed. One by one, they arrived. The city council members, the businessmen, Sal Moretti looking smug. Then came Henderson, his movements jerky and nervous. Finally, Miller pulled up, looking pale and haggard. He hesitated before going in, a man walking to his own execution. He had no idea he was already dead. 20 minutes later, the show began. 3 unmarked sedans screeched to a halt, blocking the alleyway. Men in suits and tactical vests swarmed the back entrance announcing Internal Affairs with the kind of righteous fury that only cops busting other cops can muster. It was over in minutes. They were led out one by one, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. When they brought Henderson out in cuffs, his eyes were wide with betrayal. Then they brought out Miller. He wasn't just cuffed, he looked like he'd been roughed up. Sal Moretti's men probably gave him a goodbye present inside before IA burst in. As they pushed his head down to get into a car, his eyes swept the street in a desperate, searching gaze. For a fleeting second I thought he looked right at my van. He saw nothing. I was just part of the scenery. The news was glorious. Police captain, officer implicated in mob-run gambling ring. Henderson was suspended indefinitely, his career a smoldering ruin. Miller was fired and facing a litany of charges, from consorting with known felons to obstruction of justice. Sal Moretti was out on bail in a day, but I knew he wouldn't forget Miller's perceived betrayal. The man's life was over. He had lost his job, his reputation, and he had made an enemy of a man who held grudges for a living, all because he couldn't stand the sight of a black woman's flowers. A month later, the first chill of autumn was in the air. I was back in my garden. I'd ordered new bulbs online, a rare cultivar of stargazer that promised blooms twice the size of my mother's originals. I was on my knees, turning the soil, my hands covered in the familiar, comforting dirt. The dead stalks were gone, the ground was cleared, ready for a new beginning. That's when I saw him. It was Miller. He stood on the sidewalk, a ghost haunting the scene of his own downfall. He wasn't in uniform anymore. He wore stained jeans and a faded sweatshirt, and he'd lost a dangerous amount of weight. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollowed out and haunted. He just stood there, staring. Not at me at first, but at the empty patch of earth where my lilies had been. Slowly, his gaze lifted and met mine. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, no arrogance, just a deep, profound confusion, like a man who had tripped on a pebble and somehow fallen off a cliff. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know what I was. But as he looked at me, kneeling peacefully in my garden, a flicker of terrible understanding seemed to dawn in his eyes. He knew, on some primal level, that this was the source. That the woman whose flowers he had destroyed for a moment of petty satisfaction was somehow connected to the complete annihilation of his entire world. I didn't smile. I didn't say a word. I simply held his gaze, my expression as neutral as a freshly wiped server. I let him see me, let him connect the dots in his shattered mind. Then I broke eye contact, turning my attention back to the rich, dark earth in front of me. I picked up a new bulb, its paper-thin skin smooth in my palm, and gently pressed it into the soil. I covered it, patting the ground firmly, a promise of future beauty. When I looked up again, he was gone. He had trampled my garden, so I had salted his earth. My suburbs were boring again, and my new lilies, I knew, would be magnificent.